Okay, let's jump right into a deep dive today. And this one might just completely flip how you think about something really fundamental. Human language.
Yeah, we're exploring a theory. It's pretty radical, honestly. Challenges basically everything we thought we knew about where our words actually come from.
And where are we getting this from?
So our source material, it's excerpts from a text called When Matter Spoke, The Forbidden Origins of Human Language. It's written by an assistant to a Dr. Mamujan Kuchkarov from the Academy of Adamic Language, OTA for short.
Okay, and the core idea here is, well, it's kind of wild. It suggests language isn't just, cultural, or something we all just agreed on.
Right. It's saying it's fundamentally physical, like a biophysical thing that happens because we interact with reality.
So it raises these really intriguing questions, doesn't it? Like the source asks, what if dead matter actually tells more truth than we do?
Exactly. And what if language wasn't this social contract, but just a consequence, something that emerged directly from our physical experience of the world?
That's a fascinating place to start. So the first part of this text, it introduces Dr. Mamujan Kuchkarov. And his background, it's not linguistics, right?
No, not at all. He's described as a physicist, actually, an experimentalist.
Okay. And what was he experimenting on?
Well, his early work, it involved manipulating things that don't speak, non-speaking materials. Think crystals, ions in a vacuum, using really precise tools.
Like mass spectrometers, ion guns, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Tools that let you really push and pull matter at a tiny scale, see how it reacts.
And the source says he, quote, forced matter to speak. Now, obviously not with words.
Right, not literally words. But he observed its measurable shifts, its responses. Under very controlled conditions, it would only react in predictable mathematical ways.
Ah, and this led him to a pretty crucial insight.
Yeah, he realized this dead matter, as the source calls it, it only responds if the conditions are perfect, the exact physical conditions. It sticks strictly to physics, math, reality.
No wiggle room.
No lies, no rhetoric, nothing like that, just cause and effect.
And he has his quote right, dead matter tells the truth.
It only responds when conditions are right. No lies, no rhetoric, just math and reality.
Yeah. And then the source contrasts that sharply with human communication, saying the human mouth, it's fluent in deception.
Ugh. That's a pretty stark contrast.
It is. And this observation, this difference between, the inherent truthfulness of physical stuff versus how easily humans can potentially deceive, that's what made him turn his attention to language science.
Right. You can see the paradox he's getting at. We seem to just trust human speech, which he sees as easily manipulated, while we demand rigorous proof and super precise conditions to get any truth out of the physical world.
Exactly. That disconnect, that's presented as the fundamental problem he sees in traditional linguistics.
And the source, it really doesn't pull any punches here. It says he looked at some foundational figures. Saussure.
Chomsky?
Yeah, Ferdinand de Saussure and Noam Chomsky. And he found their theories. The source uses the word hollow.
Hollow how?
Well, describes them as philosophically circular, kind of chasing their own tails. Methodologically ungrounded, so not based on solid empirical methods. And empirically unverifiable, meaning you can't really test them out in the real world.
So he thinks linguistics just missed something fundamental.
He believes it missed a simple truth, as the text puts it.
Which is?
That language is not arbitrary. It is not a social contract. It is a biophysical consequence of our interaction with reality.
Okay, wow. That directly challenges that whole idea that, the sound dog only means dog, because we all agreed it does.
Precisely. It's saying the connection is much deeper, much more physical than that.
Which I guess brings us to his alternative idea, the Odom-Tilly theory.
Exactly. Odom-Tilly.
Which means?
The language of Adam. And the source presents this as, radical, but also insists it's empirically testable, unlike, it argues, the theories it's critiquing.
So what's the core idea of Odom-Tilly?
The central premise is basically that every sound we make and every symbol we might use isn't random. It carries inherent meaning because it's directly tied to our sensory experience of reality.
So language isn't like a layer on top of reality?
Yeah.
It's part of the physical interaction itself.
That's the idea, yeah. It introduces two key concepts. Phonosemantic codes, where the sound itself carries meaning.
Phonosemantic.
And signosemantic codes, where a symbol or sign is inherently meaningful. And Odom-Tilly, this original language, is proposed as this perfect fusion of these direct experience-based codes.
Now this is where it gets maybe a bit controversial, it mentions the Garden of Eden.
It does, but it's important how it frames it, not as, religious dogma, but provocatively it suggests that story is a kind of corrupted record of linguistic genesis. Meaning the very first moments of language weren't people sitting around deciding on words. They were direct, physical, embodied reactions to the world.
Okay, like what? Does it give examples?
Yeah, the source gives these really vivid examples. It says, the sound of biting an apple, the hiss of a snake, the gasp of fear, the call of a name, all these were the first words.
Huh. But then it corrects itself.
Right. It says not words, actually. Reactions, codes, reality encoded in breath and bone.
So the first linguistic bits were basically biophysical responses, tied directly to senses, actions, not abstract labels we agreed on.
That's the core argument. A complete flip, like you said, from the traditional linguistic view.
And the source ties us back to its critique, saying, Western linguistics build itself on abstraction and structural deception. Precisely because it missed this physical grounding.
Yeah, going back to those critiques, Chomsky's universal grammar, the source claims, it just lacks any real biological basis.
Yeah.
And Saussure's idea of the arbitrary signifier, that words are just random labels, it argues that completely ignores the actual sound of language, the acoustics, and how our bodies motion the environment, how all that shapes language.
So how does Odom Tilley try to ground language in physics then?
Well, it focuses on things like acoustic repetition sounds that repeat because of how our bodies work or experience things. It looks at the meaning embedded in, like, our emotional and physical interactions with nature.
And sound patterns.
Yeah, recurring sound patterns that are directly tied to physical motion or sensation. Not abstract rules, but physical realities.
Can you give one of those specific sound examples again, the T sound?
Right. The source argues the phone T isn't just some random sound for a letter. It is intrinsically the sound of contact resistance.
Okay, how? How is the sound physically linked to contact?
Well, think about making the two sound. Your tongue makes frame contact right behind your teeth. It resists the airflow for a split second, then releases it. The claim is the sound itself, that little puff, embodies that physical action of contact and resistance.
Okay. The physical mechanics of making the sound mirrors the concept. And what about the E sound? The flowing water.
Yeah, the source suggests E is the echo of flowing water in the mouth and throat. Again, the implication, though the excerpt isn't super detailed phonetically, is that the way your mouth shapes, the tongue movement, it somehow physically or acoustically mimics or relates to the sensation or sound of flowing.
And these aren't just metaphors, according to this.
No, the source is really emphatic here. It calls these connections testable, repeatable, biophysical facts, not just, interpretations or poetic ideas.
It is. Yeah, radical reframing.
Yeah.
And if you take that premise seriously, it must have some pretty significant implications for, say, artificial intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. The source definitely goes there. It applies the OT theory directly to critique modern AI, especially natural language processing, NLP.
I mean, what's the critique?
Basically, that current AI speaks in borrowed language. It's just scraping massive amounts of text data, recombining it, but it doesn't truly hear or sense language like a human does.
Cannot, because it's learning from text.
Exactly. It's trained primarily on written abstraction, as the source puts it. Text data that's totally removed from the original embodied physical context where language actually arises, according to this theory.
So they're just pattern matching abstract symbols.
Making them, in the source's words, statistical parrots. They can mimic human language patterns brilliantly, but without grasping the underlying physical reality those patterns are supposed to represent.
So they're stuck in the arbitrary signifier world, not the biophysical consequence world.
That's the argument. In the OT framework, it proposes a totally different path if you want true human-like NLP.
Which is?
Instead of just making bigger and bigger language models fed on more text, the focus should shift to what they call deep linguistic embodiment.
Meaning, you'd have to teach AI language more like how a child learns, from sensory input interaction.
Pretty much. Dr. Kuchkarov is quoted with this great line. You want AI to think like a human. First, teach it how to hear like a newborn.
Like a newborn.
He says, not sentences, sounds, bodies, repetition, nature. The idea is the AI needs to build its understanding from the ground up, from those basic phonosemantic and signosemantic codes rooted in physical reality, before it can ever truly understand complex human language.
Wow. Okay, so that brings us to the final part of the source material called the unheard language.
Right, and here Dr. Kuchkov is positioned almost like a whistleblower.
Against linguistics.
Yeah, the source controversially claims he's exposing 150 years of linguistic fraud, which is a very strong statement.
How does it justify calling it fraud? Is it saying linguists were deliberately deceiving people?
Well, the excerpts don't really suggest deliberate personal deception. It seems more like a critique of the entire paradigm.
Yeah.
The fraud, in this view, is building a whole academic field on foundations like arbitrary signs, ungrounded grammar that the source claims ignore the fundamental biophysical reality of language. So it's more about the foundations being flawed, not necessarily individuals being fraudsters.
Okay, that context helps. And stemming from that critique, they make this bold claim that the original language, Odom Tili, it's not actually extinct.
No, they claim it's just buried under noise, cultural, political, academic, all the layers we've built on top of it.
Buried but not gone. And the source ends this bit by saying this original language is coming back.
Yeah, it's quite evocative. And the Academy of Adamic Language, the OTA, where this research is happening, they state their goal very clearly.
Which
to
is?
rebuild language, not from dictionaries, but from the source, nature.
So it's a call to completely rethink where language comes from, move away from abstract systems, dictionaries, grammar rules.
And go back towards what they see as the fundamental physical embodied connection between us, the world, and the sounds we make.
Okay. So there you have it. A deep dive into a theory that really turns things on their head, suggesting language is physical, a consequence of reality.
And that the truth in non-living matter might tell us something about the nature of human speech itself.
We've touched on how this challenges some really big names in linguistics, and even how it might change our approach to AI. It's definitely, well, it's a lot to chew on.
It really is. Thanks for joining us on this exploration into such a, unexpected perspective on language, drawn from this particular source.
And maybe here's a final thought for you to consider, something to mull over. If language is fundamentally rooted in the physical world, in our bodies, as this theory suggests, and if dead matter has this inherent truthfulness, while human speech is seen as potentially deceptive, what does that perspective mean for how you think about truth, about communication, about trust even, in your everyday life? Something worth thinking about.